that it's quite important for people to be able to speak. Uh, I mean, just a simple introduction is so powerful. And I personally, I'm never in a rush to move through to what supposedly we're supposed to be doing, because in essence, we miss a lot of life because we think we need to move forward so fast, and we then lose the opportunity to actually connect with each other. So thank you for Janet, thank you for asking people to introduce themselves, and welcome to being part of at least a conversation that we regularly have in our community of the Positive Impact Movement. And I'll just say a couple of words about myself for those of you who don't yet know me. So there is always like what to say. I think you guys went through the same. It's like, what should I say about me in a quick way? And I just want to say that I've invested my whole life practically in helping people regain their strength to speak their lives, to live their lives. That's really my life's work. That's my passion. And that's why I'm here. So that's my quick introduction. Maybe later I can say more, but that gives you the essence of what we care about here in our community, which is our being. Who are we more than anything? Who are we? And so I'll take a few minutes during this call to speak into something that I think is uniquely important in our world these days. And I ask you to consider the reflections that you're having, and then share whatever comes up for you, after the few minutes that I'll be with you guys, speaking from my own perspective of things. So I would like to start by saying that for many of us, the routine of our lives has changed. Personally, my routine hasn't changed that much since I usually work from home. So it's not like, my own patterns or habits have changed that much. But what has changed, or what is continually changing, is, well, first of all, that both of our children are home, so they're doing school from home. So there is more of that family dynamic that we usually don't have on a regular basis in our home. And then what is also changing for me is that I'm noticing that I'm being called more urgently to speak into the matters that sit most deeply in my heart, and to not wait any longer. So I don't know if I'll come across a little bit too forward, but that's the energy that I am in, and I feel a sense of responsibility to communicate some matters that are of unique importance to, I think, our humanity. And in this case, you guys, and me included, within what we're experiencing as a humanity. So let me first bring attention to a pattern that I think we've fallen into as a whole, as a society, that I think is very related to our awakening as human beings. So in essence, one of the things that has happened throughout my life in the work that I do is that I notice how much we tend to suppress our own voice. It's almost like we default to what is being requested of us, or the expectations that are given to us by the external world, And in the process, we begin believing that if we meet these expectations, then we're going to be okay. And another thing that happens is that in the process of doing that, we start thinking that our self-value is dependent on meeting those expectations. And so now let's take that conversation or that particular perspective into some of the things that are happening in our humanity today. About 2007, some Asian scientists called us to the attention that one of the biggest threats to humanity resided in these viruses. And this happened around 2007. And they particularly said that the consumption of these exotic animals was a problem, like bats and things like that, because they contained viruses that we had never seen, and that if we continued doing that, it was going to produce a catastrophic situation in our society. This happened more than 10 years ago. And one of the things that they said was, we're not going to be able to use the airlines. We're going to be waiting for a vaccine to help us, deal with these viruses, and those vaccines aren't going to be produced fast enough to deal with the amount of deaths that are going to be emerging during those times, and that we needed to actually, stop the consumption of these wild and exotic animals, and then at the very least, even if we couldn't control the spread of of these viruses locally, we could definitely prevent pandemics from happening all over the world. So if you really think about that message and you wonder, it's like, well, what's the problem here? Like, why do we hear things on the outside and we fail to make changes that are conducive to the well-being of our humanity? Why does that happen, right? I suggest that the issue is totally related to what I was referring to at the very beginning, which is we tend to suppress our voice to meet these expectations that are put on us as a society, and we forget that we have a responsibility to actually take action for the sake of the greater good, because we don't think our voice matters. In essence, we've grown used to thinking, well, somebody else will take care of it, or maybe my voice is not that useful, or I don't know how to contribute, etc. Well, what has unfolded in our humanity is an increased pattern of a lack of transparency that we live in. So in this case, the Chinese government decides to punish the internal medical professionals that were alerting us or them to the presence of this virus. And they said, well, what are you doing? You're going to have to come here and declare that all your declarations or your news are false. And sign here, otherwise we'll eliminate you, basically. And so they did this. One of the doctors ended up dying, by the way. And then 3 weeks later, the Chinese government decides to actually, make this public, alert the World Health Organization, and say, look, this is what's happening here. We have a problem. Well, we're here now. We have a big problem. And my point here is that we've fallen slaves to the bigger system, which is saying the voice that matter are only the ones that are controlling the larger contexts of our society, economically, socially, and politically. In the meantime, communities like the Positive Impact Movement are attempting to make an impact through a very different avenue, which is, let's stop trying to change systems, which are very, very hard to change. And let's actually take responsibility for our own change. I have to say that, people say these days that there is kind of like a sense of frustration because on the one hand, this virus sooner or later is going to be gone. So many of us are trying to come back, or are hoping that this ends quickly. And when are we going to come back to the world as it was? That's happening on one side. On the other side, there is many of us who are thinking, wait a moment. Why do we want to go back to the norm? Because if we go back to the norm, we're not going to actually change anything. We're just going to kind of prevent the next, or let's say it this way, we're going to be living in greater fear of the next crisis. That's what we're going to be doing. So many of us are going to be on our edge thinking, oh my God, so how are we going to deal with the next one, right? And because we've defaulted to being dependent on these authoritarian, autocratic, let's say systems that are more concerned with quantity over quality, more concerned with productivity than with quality of human relationships, more concerned with short-term gain and control and economic manipulation than human dignity and human integrity. So something needs to be done, and we no longer have the luxury of waiting for the bigger systems or the socioeconomic, political animals that we live under to actually lead us into the change. That's not going to happen. And if you're arguing against that proposition that I have, I don't mind. You can argue all you want, but sooner or later, you're going to have to face to the reality that we have something that we are indeed in control of, which is our own evolution, your own evolution, who you are as a human being. I just want to highlight something quickly. Like when you were introducing yourself, Gemma, you mentioned a variety of things, but to me it sounded like you have been taking increased responsibility for yourself, noticing that you can live a life that is more in alignment with who you are, in spite of the bigger context that we're living in as a society. And that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. It's like, in spite of our challenges, that we take responsibility for ourselves. And I'm going to say something that stands at the core of what I'm saying in this moment, which is this: the kind of crisis that we're living in, which in royal fashion shows the lack of transparency we're living in should in itself be deemed the greatest crime that was ever and has ever been produced against humanity in the history of our humanity. That is the biggest issue that we're facing. It's not the crisis. It's us quieting our voice, us allowing, the loss of our voice to lead us into a kind of motivation and a kind of seeking of achievement, if you will, through our work that is really driven by fear rather than driven by our true commitment to actually reaching into who we are, what our true strengths are, and what we need to do moving forward in order to develop quality, in order to develop, a more responsible consumption of goods that are actually good for our environment and our well-being as a society, for the reduction of our addiction to short-term solutions, including drugs, many of the drugs, but also including medications that are only there to suppress our symptoms, but to, delay the biggest bomb, which is our demise, our, the end of everything. And so just want to highlight that, this is what stands at the core of what I'm saying, that these kinds of crises that we're in, which, as I just mentioned, are just laying out. I mean, how could it be more clear? The lack of transparency that we're in, that in the world that we're living in, the lack of transparency that we're living in, that is in itself the greatest humiliation, the greatest aggression that we have produced against humanity in the history of everything. So with that, what does it mean to take personal responsibility? Well, it means that you need to ask yourself, we need to ask ourselves, where am I suppressing my voice? How is that happening? How am I also perpetuating the world that we're in with my own, if I ask myself, with my own lack of capacity to speak frankly and, transparently, candidly, whether right or wrong, but to speak truthfully, my voice, and to actually stand, instead of short-term productivity, to stand for quality in relationships. Instead of short-term solutions to my pleasure or my lack of pleasure, to stand for integrity and human dignity. So we all can answer that question individually. And it's not a judgment, by the way. We are, I think, in this day and age, in the moment that we're facing, I think we've grown beyond the excuse that, well, we need only speak into our communities with a sense of fear and kind of like concern for people being hurt by the words that we're using. And I say what is unkind is speaking lies, is not speaking into truth. I think that's very kind, actually. That's very generous. And actually cultivating spaces like we are here to be ourselves, to be who we are, to speak truthfully about our dreams and what truly motivates us, what truly, we are called to do in our lives. So for 30 some years, I have been thinking of this and working with people. I've worked in a variety of fields. I'm originally a high-performing athlete, and so I know what it means to live under pressure 24/7, of fearing failure, because in that world, if you fail, you're a complete, like, no one, you know. And when you win, you're like in the most incredible person. So no better world to kind of show you the example that I'm talking about. Like, we'll admire you for your trophies and for your diplomas and for your achievements. But as soon as you don't have those, you'll be spitted out of our world quickly. And we'll just go to the next one. Just like a drug. As soon as a drug stops working, we'll just replace the drug and we'll just start consuming a higher dose or a different kind of medication. So I dedicate my life to working with people, teams, and high performers, you know, who are interested in living a truly motivated life and using their unique strengths to excel in a healthy and sustainable way. And for that purpose, the 7 Roots of Potential model came through. And I won't go into the core of this pathway, if you will, but I can only say that it is a pathway that allows people to actually recover their strength so they can do what they came here to do, and do it for the rest of their lives, and do it joyfully and healthy, in a healthy way. So Janet, if it's okay, I'm just going to move on to well, I did want to answer a couple of questions that came up through our community, for that I have enough time to continue. Mm-hmm. So I just want to stop and open the conversation and see what else shows up, see how you guys have received this, or anything that you want to talk about, you know, hear your reflections, and perhaps I'll have a little time to address a couple of the things that came through our community earlier. So, Janet, yes.
Yes, I just wanted to add up to what you had said about the 7 roots of potential. You were saying recovering your own self, but it's not only recovering, it's also mirroring yourself, no, from the ones around you in community, and also your project, to become who you are and to create what you love.
The reason, Janet, thank you for clarifying that. It's true. It's a very powerful pathway that allows us to come into community without having to judge each other, which there is a lot of that in the world. It's like, unless you fit in, then you're not welcome. And this is a pathway that allows everybody just to, we're not claiming any ideology here, but it's also for people who are interested in doing something. It's not just to talk. I mean, I've been a clinical psychologist. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and one of my criticisms of the world of mental health care is that, you know, back when I was a full-time clinician, I used to ask my patients, say, well, I know that the records say that you have such and such diagnosis, but why are you here? And they said, what do you mean? Like, I'm here because I have a problem with my emotions or whatever, you know, I have a mood disorder, etc. And I need help. And I would say, yes, but you've come here for 2 years. And what has happened? Like, I know your diagnosis, but what else? Who else are you? Like, what do you want to do with your life? And they would start smiling and say, well, I don't know. It's like, I'm here just because I have a problem. I say, well, in order to solve your problem or your challenge, you're going to need to choose something that you want to work toward. We cannot just keep talking about problems all life long. And of course, you know, my practice was packed. I didn't have any spaces. And all the other physicians we used to ask me, what are you doing? And I said, well, I want people to get well.